keeping you connected and protected.
Welcome to DAS Talk, the essential podcast on distributed antenna systems and in-building communication. Hosted by Peter, VP of Gamma, and Philip Nicholas. This Gamma Electronic series focuses on emergency response and safety. Join us as we navigate the challenges of building effective communication systems for North America's first responders. We delve into the advancements in emergency responder radio systems and the transformative impact on new technologies. Tune in for insightful discussions aimed at increasing knowledge and awareness in the DAS field. Whether you're a professional or an enthusiast, DAS Talk is your gateway to understanding the nexus of technology, safety, and communication.
Hey everyone, what's up? This is Peter and Travis. We are here with you today with our amazing episode of DAS Talk. I am very, very excited today. This is going to be one of a kind episode because we have a repeating guest, our first repeating guest. It's Travis McGaha. He's the Deputy Fire Marshal from Concord, North Carolina. Travis, it's great to be here with you today. I'm excited to chit-chat about today's episode. How are you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's good to be repeating to come back. And if people are wondering about the background, we are recording this, and this will be released on the All Clear podcast network as well. So it's good to have you back. Heck, you were a guest on our show, so it's nice to kind of circle back around and have a chance to chat a little bit more about what's going on.
Absolutely. So why not? Let's dive back in. Let's rehash what we did before. So you and I, we met through once upon a time, probably an email blast was sent out and an invitation came to jump on our podcast. You came on our podcast and you brought up some really, really amazing and interesting conundrums or challenges that your guys were having. We talked about comms, we talked about, DAS and ERCS and ERCS and how that was something very, very important to you. So I was hoping we could just touch base about what we were talking about before. And I remember clearly it was one of the conversations I had with you, and this one really left a mark on me. So you were telling me about how you had a map and it was all about green and brown buildings. And green buildings were the buildings that had a DAS or ERCS installed in it. And brown buildings were not. And how your guys, when you deployed your guys, because they were the ones who were going out, and they would have a different plan of attack when they would go in based upon whether or not the system had an active ERCS or ERCS in it. Help me out if I'm not wrong there. Is that somewhat accurate? And maybe
Yes.
You can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes. So in the state of North Carolina, the radio repeater systems kind of became a thing probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And I remember it was a big issue. It's like, what is this thing? What are we doing? How do we apply this? Well, since then, we've gotten quite a few of the ERCS systems in our buildings, and it's becoming more and more and more common as we get with these bigger warehouses, high-rise buildings, things like that. And, our guys have always had tactics that they had worked out to work inside of buildings that had no radio coverage. But now that we have these systems coming in, we've tried to train, our line firefighters about what they are, how they work. And now we're starting to see patterns like we talked about. You can almost map it out. There's parts of town where you'll have 3, 4, 5 buildings in a clump that all have, ERCS systems, but yet you may have other areas that don't. The buildings aren't big enough. So we do have those areas that are really starting to build up, and that map changes. I would say probably every 6 months it is significantly different because we have so many big projects popping in. And, our guys are training on different ways to deal with this, and learning to work with the ERCS system is a very critical part of them having an increased chance of survivability if something would go bad in some of these newer buildings.
So let's talk about that a little bit and why having an ERCS system installed helps the health and the life of the first responder. And the reason why I say first responders is because it's both. It's not just firemen, it's not just EMT, but it's also our boys in blue as well. So maybe you can help, our listeners tell us why that component, that RF component with the amplifier installed is important to you guys and why.
So here in the state of North Carolina, a lot of it goes back to the size of the building, the configuration of the building, things like that will determine whether or not it has to be applied for or if it even needs to be looked at. But what we're finding when you get into some of the larger warehouses, some of the larger apartment complexes and things like that, you have many dead areas. And the way that we're addressing that is by using the amplification systems. It allows our radios to work throughout the system or throughout the areas. You were talking about how everybody benefits from it. It's not just a fire thing. Survivability and going home. Those are two of the biggest things that our podcast stands for. And we try to help firefighters and first responders understand that there are things in place to help them. We have a apartment complex here where we're located. I think it's got 13 buildings. Majority of them have at least some form of ERCS system in it, and they're all fibered together. Well, it worked great about a year and a half, 2 years after it opened. They started having malfunctions with the system, and we had a police officer that was responding to a call at one of the apartments, and his radio didn't work. And then it happened again. And after about the second time, our communications department's like, hey, there's something not right here. Well, me and a couple of the guys that helped final it, we went out and we walked through because this is becoming a code enforcement issue at that point. And we walked through and we saw that it was basically a big bubble of non-functioning radio coverage. So that was one of those where the DAS system was not being maintained and it kind of went the opposite direction. But the minute we got it hammered out, our brothers in blue had full coverage. Fire has had full coverage, so has EMS in those areas. And it really has become a thing, for lack of a better term, that other first responders realize is critical. And we've always known that communications is the key to being able to be effective at our job. But when you don't have communications, you don't have that lifeline. And the ERCS systems are key, especially as we start getting into bigger and more dangerous buildings when it comes to size and use and things like that. It's very critical to have these systems in place, and training cannot be said enough for that and the value of it.
So if I'm clear, like from your guys' perspective, dead zones really do hurt tactical responses in emergencies because you can't communicate clearly, or you have to communicate in a point-to-point scenario, and it's much more difficult to navigate through that when you've got massive dead zones in buildings.
Absolutely. A dead zone will kill you. And I'm not saying that to be funny, but if you have, for example, a firefighter down and he calls Mayday, if his radio doesn't work, unless there's somebody that knows where he's at, it's done. And, that for people outside of the fire service or possibly people outside of the first responder realm, when you talk about, that could be the end of a life just because you don't have the ability to communicate, it strikes real hard very quickly, the importance of these systems and, getting our side to understand it and then also getting the public to understand why they're important. It's a key bridge that we need to establish.
Yeah. And so I've been doing this podcast for a hot minute now, and we've just gone through so many stories where this ends up becoming a problem. And it's something that we just can't talk about enough. Not because there's the business side of it, of course, as well, but there's a life safety side of it, of where it's really, really important. And if we do it wrong or we don't do it at all, then that complicates things severely. And like you're saying, even when the system is malfunctioning, golly, you had multiple calls to a place where they're not getting signal. And if it's in a big building, that's really kind of scary. I mean, I just think about how quick domestics can turn. Like in domestics where you've got EMT who are out to help, and they turn south really, really quick.
Sure.
So you guys are out there to help and save a life, and that person you're trying to help might not be mentally stable. And that person all of a sudden starts becoming violent. And now it's not just a domestic where you're trying to help. You got a domestic where you need to get police involved to help you guys just get out of that situation effectively, or, resolve the problem, whatever it is. And to me, that's just a scary, scary situation when you can't communicate outside of a corridor in a hallway near someone's home or their apartment in these large buildings. That if we're going to send them in, we better be able to get them out.
Yeah, for sure. But let me try to draw a little bit of an illustration for folks that are not in the fire service. So I'm going to pick on you for a minute, Peter. Have you ever been out hiking? I think you do some outdoor stuff. Have you ever been in a situation where you were truly alone and you really knew that there was nobody coming to help you if you ever twisted your ankle fell or something like that.
Well, I thought about that because it's funny you bring that up because I do love to hike and I always follow the stories about people who do go hiking. And I do very, very small hikes in local
Right.
areas where if I fall and hurt myself, I do have signal. However, if I'm ever by myself, I have thought about, well, what would happen if my cell phone died and I wouldn't have signal? And I did fall and hurt myself and you're all by yourself and you have no way to communicate. In fact, I have a quick story about this and I have to tell it. It revolves around my father-in-law. So my father-in-law, he had a stroke and he insisted on going back to work. And he went back to work and he was in Arizona. And in the middle of the night, he was, not only did he have a stroke, but he was a quasi hemiplegic, but he insisted on still doing his sales job, even though he was a hemiplegic. He went to the bathroom in the middle of the night and he fell. Okay. He didn't have a cell phone with him. And this is how I can make the closest analogy in my mind, right? He fell, he was there banging on the wall for hours when he fell, because nobody could hear him. And it was only until the next day, till someone finally woke up at like 6 o'clock in the morning due to him banging and banging and banging. And then they called the hotel manager and they got him out. So he lived, and I can only imagine how scared that is to literally be helpless because he couldn't get up. He fell in the bathroom. So in that scenario, I feel like it would be the same situation where you're off hiking, you got no way out, and it's like you're just stuck. And I've watched enough of those I shouldn't have survived episodes
Yep.
to realize that's a terrible, terrible, terrible feeling.
So the reality is if you take that and ramp it up to where you can't see where you're at, you're disoriented where you're at, and the only communications you have is through a radio, and that voice on the other end, whether it be dispatch or the battalion chief or whoever, that gets real very quickly. I was talking to a firefighter a while back, and he was he was in Texas, but he was talking about they had a fire at a warehouse where they had, I think it was cotton bales, and he said he got to the point they didn't have a ERCS system in the building, but he said he realized that I don't know where I'm at. And the building, you laugh thinking, well, how do you get lost? Well, when you get in a bad situation, you can get pinned down very quickly. And he was talking about if it wasn't for somebody having remembered a line, like a safety line to get back out, they would have been totally gone. Well, the thing that the ERCS systems does, it maintains at least the digital lifeline with the radios. That is one of the most critical things that we can have. And, with technology now, radios are more than just, hey, how are you doing? But they can, actually work as hotspots. There's all types of telemetry and things that can also be transmitted as well from these radios that a lot of municipalities carry. The value of the ERCS system is way over the top. It cannot be understated enough.
Yeah, we still have so many situations where there's building happening all throughout the United States. Even once small cities now that are becoming rather large cities rather quickly, because building is usually not always in Dallas or always in the middle of Charlotte. It's on the outsides of Charlotte or it's in the outsides of Dallas, and they're kind of growing up and not necessarily always growing out. And that's where the ERCS become even more critical, because many smaller towns and smaller cities are growing up, because that's just the nature of kind of how building is right now. And that's where they become that much more critical in doing that. However, we have so many of our code enforcement brothers don't even know what a DAS or an ERCS is. They just don't know. So we've got to do a better job at letting them know that that we can make their comms work inside, and there are ways to do it. In fact, not only can they do it, they actually have the authority and the power to be able to make that happen, but they don't even know they have it.
Mm-hmm.
That blows my mind. And I tell you, when we talk about Texas is one of those where I attended the Texas Fire Marshals, and we had half of the guys come by and half of the guys mentioned that their comms were not working in large tilt-ups in school districts all across their jurisdiction. And they just thought, they took it for granted that their comms wouldn't work. And they didn't know, well, by the way, I actually have the authority to require these things to be put in buildings, and then I can make my comms work that keep us all safe. They didn't even know it. So that's kind of like where we're going here. You've outlined some really critical need for why we should have them. And what we did through our podcast and through our university and through the summit coming up is why we're trying to help educate and teach people the importance of the reason and the why, which you just specified. So where that comes is like, you and I had been talking, say we wanted to put together an in-person educational summit. We had a few calls about that. You came back and you were like, well, this seems like a pretty good idea. And that kind of led us to what we're doing right now, which is coming up in the very near future in August 5th and 6th, which is a DAS University Live Summit. And at this summit, we pulled together an amazing course for code enforcement and courses for integrators and other project managers and basically all the stakeholders in the industry where they can get what we call as continuing education units that you said are so important for them to get. So at this event, they can get at day one, they can get 6 continuing education units. And on certain courses on day 2, they'll be able to even further their education more and get up to 3, maybe even 6 more, depending on what classes we have lined up on day 2. Which is a truly unique situation, none like any other in the industry where we've done this on the ERCS and ERCS side of things. And so, and all clear. And Travis, you're playing a critical role in this. And that's why I'm thrilled to talk to you about it. What are you guys doing in this? And how's the reception been on your side?
Well, every time I mention it to one of the other municipalities around us, in fact, I got a phone call the other day from one of the adjacent jurisdictions, and they had a question about, pretty basic question. And we talked through it, and I said, oh, and by the way, how would you like to get some training on this? He's like, absolutely. And the minute you start mentioning to code officials here in North Carolina, number one, you can get your 6 hours of con ed for your fire inspector 1, 2, and 3. You got their attention. And when you say it's free, you really have their attention. And when you talk about topics that aren't boring, because you can only talk about exits and egress and signs and lights so much before people want something new. And the whole ERCS, BDA, topic is so under discussed. We've had training on it, but it's been from other code enforcement officials, which is great. But one of the things that I think will be truly unique about the summit is the fact that we will have the opportunity as code enforcement officials, from my point of view, from our side, to be able to talk to those of you in the industry and be able to ask questions and not be judged. Because, I think a lot of times when you're on an inspection from an AHJ perspective, you don't want to look like you don't know what you're talking. And, never fake it. That's always bad. And I'll be the first to admit I learned something new about, radio systems every time one gets installed. I always learn something new. In fact, I called you not too long ago. We were talking about the 2 buildings side by side and reporting and things like that. There's times that we need to know stuff. And I think by having an open opportunity for the, fellowship between, the code guys and also the installers and the integrators, I think that's going to go a long way to help make things work. And it'll kind of take away some of the stigma, particularly on our side, for asking questions. And then again, hopefully you guys will understand we're not evil, we're not bad, we're not there to shut you down. And maybe we can even talk about what are the best practices to have a good interaction between, contractor and code official.
I love it because I think that's also missing in the industry as well. I really do. What's good practices for code official, right? And then on the flip side, what's good practices for an integrator who wants to get their certificate of occupancy, and how do they interact appropriately with code official when the code official has some questions about their system? Because Travis, you've been around the bend a few times. You know these things. You know how they work. You know the importance of your comms working. The question you asked me about, the building right next to each other on a fiber system, how is building B going to be able to know whether their system is down, was a really, really important question. And it took a little bit of digging, and it sounds like we had a few solutions there and options for the integrator to set that up in the building where the building B and building A would both be able to know that the condition of their ERCS or ERCS are installed. I thought that was great. However, that was coming from you, who's a seasoned, I'll say you're a seasoned vet when it comes to, inspecting these systems and kind of making sure they're installed. But I guarantee you the guy next door probably doesn't know that. And he needs to know. And that kind of question needs to be asked in front of him so he can say, oh, wow, Travis figured this out. That's really cool. What happens if that happens in my jurisdiction?
Well, the big thing I've learned as a code official, and it's not just about DAS systems, whether it be fire alarm, sprinkler, construction, fire pumps, you name it. Don't ever think that you know it all, because you don't. And try to surround yourself with valuable resources that you can ask questions to. And like I've got a fire alarm guy that I don't mind calling when I have something, even if it's not his project. They're typically good to answer questions to understand. And same with sprinkler. I can call Brian just about any time and ask him a question, and he will educate me when I don't understand. And that's the big thing going into these inspections. If you don't understand it, ask the questions, and don't feel like somebody's going to try to take advantage of you, because I know most of the contractors that I've met on the BDA side, and all they want to do is teach and help you understand what's going on. And so that relationship, I think, is something that really needs to be established.
And I do agree that that kind of level of trust, I really like what you're saying. In other words, because the code official doesn't want to, make it as difficult as possible for you to get your certificate of occupancy and jump through unnecessary hoops, which are not in the code and not in their requirement document. What they really want is a functioning system where there's coverage in the building, and they want to know that the system is working, and they want to know that the system is not interfering with the macro. Right. So that's what they really, really want to know. And however, if a contractor comes in, an integrator comes in, and they're very apprehensive and not willing to relinquish information, it seems like they're hiding things because they did a shoddy job. That's a problem, because they got to recognize it's your job to look at the system and make sure things are working right. That's your job.
Right. And, I would say 99.9% of the interactions that I've had, whether it be someone that actually does a job, or sometimes we'll just have a BDA installer call about, hey, I might be doing a job. Just spending time talking to them, you kind of get a good feeling, are they here to do the job, or are they, just kind of value added service, for lack of a better term. We had one of our very first systems we put in, God, this was probably 6 or 7 years ago. When the installer came in, he was a very seasoned fire alarm installer. He was very good at that. But he said, man, I went to a course, and I guess it was like at some ballroom at a Holiday Inn or something. And he had gotten a certification for BDA, and he realized that one of the companies that they install alarms for had a BDA in a box solution. He's like, man, I can install them now. Well, needless to say, that did not go very well. And we had to work through it. Now that we as a jurisdiction have more understanding, and the guys that work with me, we're able to kind of say, all right, well, this is not a value added service. This is something that's very serious. And, and you can kind of tell real quick where you're standing with the installer as well. And like I said, 99% of the time, very professional guys that are willing to share their knowledge.
So I'm curious, what was, if you don't mind, you don't have to relinquish who it was or whatever, but what was the problems with the install? Do you remember?
Well, part of it was just the tuning of the system, the uplink, the downlink. He installed the equipment properly, but as you know, with BDAs, and HJs will figure this out as well, they have to be set. And we've had cases where we sat with, I don't know if you know Ross Pearson, but he is with Pearson Wireless, one of the most brilliant guys I've ever met that deals, with the technical end of the BDA stuff. And we had a project, I don't know how many days we worked in the basement of this big manufacturing facility trying to make sure it was right. But he was right there the whole time. And that's where I learned about tuning. That first opportunity, I knew nothing about that. But, flash forward 5 or 6 years, okay, yes, it has to be tuned, the uplink, the downlink. And there's so many small variables. And then watching a truly experienced installer, you can see them literally make changes on their laptop, and you see the effects within minutes. And that's the thing that I've come to appreciate. I don't know how to make those changes, but I kind of have a feeling, hey, let's look at the uplink on this, because sometimes you see signal, but nothing's happening. And you have to learn how to determine, what that is. And now I have a greater appreciation for installers that know how to deal with that. And they're open to talk about it, and they're not intimidated by us asking questions. And likewise, I try not to be intimidated by asking questions and receiving information and education myself.
That's fantastic. And I think that's always a good thing, right? So like we're all learning together. And as we're going down this avenue, We need to make sure that the system, the macro system is healthy, the comms are working inside, and that result is a great result and a great benefit to everyone around. Of course, we don't want BDAs installed where they shouldn't be,
Right.
because it's unnecessary noise on the network, period. We don't want that to happen. However, I think bridging these gaps and kind of talking about these things and having an open forum and an open discussion, to me, seems like a great thing versus a combative environment, or like a lot of times it ends up happening that way. How dare you question my install, right? Well, no, I'm not really questioning your install. I just want to make sure that it's done right, bro.
Well, you got to understand, from an AHJ perspective, I can just speak for myself. I can't speak for people in bigger cities like New York and, pick a San Francisco, for example. All I know is my experience goes back to the one I just did a month ago. It's the 15 of them I did last year. And it comes from the conversations that I have with Peter at Gamma Electronics. And that's all my experience is. And I'm hoping that we can kind of break that barrier down and kind of have a freer flow of information when it comes to this stuff. So even a fire marshal in a small municipality that may have one factory and that's it with one BDA, they're not scared to talk about it or scared to address it.
Yeah. I mean, and from their perspective, I mean, if they only have one BDA in their whole jurisdiction, that's great. Then they don't have to worry about nearly as much as the macro system as someone who's got a lot of building going on. However, I guarantee you that they're not going to either require it or know they need to require it in certain circumstances. And the good thing is, and that's what this summit is going to help resolve, right? So it's going to teach about, well, what does the code actually say? What is IFC 510 and FBA 1225? The code, what does it say? And when do we require it? And what are we supposed to be looking for as far as when it comes to coverage with the comms? And the end result is that, well, we can communicate and we don't have to leave people in the dark like we've been doing and we have done. Because I believe the national code the first national code was passed in either 2012 or 2013. So that was the national code requiring it, but it takes a long time and you've got states that have to adopt it. And then you've got a lot of this, let's leave it up to the AHJ to decide on whether or not we need them in our jurisdiction. I think the real issue isn't, well, whether we need them. We know we need them, and it's necessary for the health of the first responders to have them. It's a matter of when do we require them and when do we require the coverage and the testing for them. That's it. And if you don't know anything about that, you sure as heck are not going to require it.
Well, so here in North Carolina, we are kind of, I don't know if you'd use the word blessed, but we do have very clear guidelines as to when do we need to start asking for the BDA. And we've received statewide training for fire marshals that talk about that specifically. So we know beyond the shadow of a doubt it's there. But as far as what each jurisdiction does with it, how they inspect, it's different. And it's kind of the Wild West on a certain level when it comes to, hey, how do you do a final inspection on this? And that's all the stuff we're trying to push down and try to level out. In fact, I was talking with Ed Brinson, who is the deputy chief for our state firefighters association. And he was talking about their people, not in the fire service, but people in other industries that are trying to make it be removed from the code in North Carolina. So they're not required. And, when you hear stuff like that, it's terrifying to think about that as a possibility. So, every state, if you're outside of North Carolina listening to this, check your code, check with your state fire code official. Make sure there's no monkey business going on with trying to get them removed because, this really is a serious topic.
I've heard about that. And I'll be honest, that was really, and I know where it's coming from and I get it. And to a level, right? Where it's coming from is from builders, because that's where the burden is of the cost of the systems. It is on the builders of the buildings, right? However, if you look at the overall building cost, it actually ends up being a very small percentage of the overall building cost. And so I think they need to kind of get out of their mind that, well, okay, this might cost me an extra 2%, an extra 1.5% or 3% of my building costs on the whole thing. And that might, let's just say, eat into the profits I'm making on the building. Okay, I buy that. However, I mean, think about it this way, and you got to put it this way. Look at the liability. You've got, hear me out here. Look at the liability you've got. If there's NFPA code or standards and code, IFC code, where you've got a boy in blue or a boy in red who gets injured, and it's because you didn't have one installed when you should have had one installed.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a second, or let alone someone die. So someone dies because, well, his comm did not work and he's stuck in a corridor and he couldn't get out and he couldn't make a phone call where you're supposed to have 99% coverage. Now you look at the situation, well, shoot, I didn't want to spend an extra 1% or 3% on my building. And now I've got a lawsuit out the wazoo on me. And now my insurance could be canceled because of the lawsuit, because they don't want to touch it, because I was supposed to have this in and I didn't do that. Right. I'm just saying that's a much bigger risk than the risk of adding an extra 1 or 3% in the cost of your total bill.
And to kind of stack on that a little bit, not just the cost of installation, but the cost of maintenance, because they are required to be maintained annually, just like, sprinkler system, fire alarm, whatever else. And if they're not being maintained, you will, and like I said, I can speak from experience, you will get that situation where it malfunctions to preventing your radio from working properly. And so, it is an ongoing cost. But at the end of the day, how much is a human life worth? How much is a first responder's life worth? How much is someone who lives in an apartment building? How much value can we put on their life? We can't put a number on it because it's irreplaceable. And this is the stuff that builders need to understand. And it's not that, one of the biggest confusions I think about fire code, people think the fire code is for protecting the public. Yes, it does to a certain degree. But at the end of the day, my concern, number one, is to make sure my guys, when they go in to fight a fire, they're okay. Number two, make sure that the public is okay. Those are the two priorities, and they're both very equal. But you have to think there's people that are in there all the time, and then there's people that come in when things go really bad. And you got to take care of both of those groups, not just one.
It was really impactful. It was. That really, I think it makes a difference. And I think what you're saying is of the utmost importance. So now let's go ahead and put this out there, because we talked about our event. We talked about the training. We talked about some of the challenges we have in the industry. We talked about how this cool summit that's coming up is going to help resolve some of the challenges and bridge the gap of coverage when it comes to knowledge and understanding, and how we want to duplicate this all around the nation as well, by the way. Sort of the first of what we would say would be many of an educational summit to help people understand the importance of these systems, why they should be installed, how they save lives, and so on. So how are people going to be able to do this? Well, they can go ahead and register for the event at dasuniversity.org/summit, or they can go dasuniversity.org and they can look that up, and they can find the summit also on the website as well if they type it out wrong. But Travis is also going to be talking to his friends by word of mouth, and he has some opportunity to bring people in and help them attend this really awesome event. It is in the city of Concord. Travis, tell us a little bit about the event venue, if you could, about where it's going to be held. You know it better than I do because you're from Concord. So.
Yes, and I helped them get opened up and, did their final inspections. It's at a place called Milestone 601, which is right on Highway 601 in Concord, very close to our principal station. But you're not far from the interstate. It's easy to get to. And if anybody has been to Concord before, you know that we are a great place. So we got plenty of good food, although I think you're feeding us, aren't you, Peter? I think we're eating on your nickel. But
we're feeding you.
If you're coming to stay for both days, there's plenty to do. But the most important thing is it's accessible, and it's at no cost to code enforcement officials. That is the biggest thing. Here's free education, and you get your hours for the year. I mean, come on. I mean, that's a gimme right there. I feel like I'm selling this for you. But,
all right, go for it.
But honestly, these guys are the ones that can break down the information and make it less confusing. And this is a safe environment. I hate to say safe space, but this is a safe environment where you can talk to the vendors and you can find out if something, works in your municipality. Figure out, hey, how is your ERCS game? Is it pretty slack, or do you need to tighten it up? Or are you doing pretty good? This is the opportunity for you to check for your compliance. The state of North Carolina, OSFM has already weighed on it. Charlie Johnson is very well aware and has already reviewed the material. Has given his blessings to all of it. So this is high quality stuff. And I'm trying to speak to all the code enforcement officials here in North Carolina that listen. But at the same time, if you're not from North Carolina, I encourage you to look into it and reach out to these guys. I'm sure they'd be willing to do another summit if you twisted their arm. So, there's a lot of learning here, but we're right outside of Charlotte. If you've never heard of Concord, we're about 10 minutes from Charlotte. We're the cool CFD, as we like to say, Concord Fire Department, and come visit with us. And like I said, this will be a good opportunity to learn.
You know what I also like is there'll be opportunities. So Travis, he's going to lead us. We're going to do a game. All right. And I'm excited about this game. It's called Cahoots. And I don't know if you guys ever played it before, but it is a learning game where everyone can be involved. And Travis volunteered to go ahead and lead this learning game for us and learn more, learn together, learn all about and prepare for the test. So one thing I forgot to mention, yes, there is a test involved. And if you pass the test and you pass Travis's rigorous learning class about...
Do I get a skinny microphone?
Cahoots, yes, you will get a skinny microphone.
Okay. I'm in. I'm totally in.
And if you pass the test, you get your IBCCS certification, which is In-Building Certified Code Specialist for emergency responder communication systems. And that has value as well. So you're going to get a certification. You're also going to be tested that you paid attention during the class. And it's also going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to feed you as well. I mean, and you're going to meet a lot of cool dudes. You're going to meet Travis. You're going to meet the gang in Concord. You're going to meet everyone else. I just can't wait. It's going to be exciting. So...
Well, I don't know if I fall under the cool category, but there are some fun guys that will be there. And I do have to say this, if you're freaked out by the thought of taking a test, don't worry. They'll make sure all the answers are very well emphasized during the times of instruction. So don't stress about that.
Don't stress. But we want you to pay attention, right?
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got to be kind of challenging. It can't be like a breeze. So it's got to be, we want you to do it. And here's the other thing. Is in the event you don't pass the test the first time, we're going to have the same course. It's going to be online on our platform. You can take that same course, do a review, and then take the test later again to get your certification. So we've got multiple ways in how you can learn the material, learn it live, take it again. If you're anything like me, you got to do it again. Do it again. And once it gets in there, it's kind of hard to get out, right? But I gotta learn multiple times, and that's the way I work.
But I know somebody's getting ready to ask this question. Yes, you will get your 6 hours of continuing education, regardless if you pass the test or not. If you walk in the door, you hang out and you pay attention, you'll get your credit. So that's the other critical part.
Yes, you sure will. Travis, I appreciate you coming on this episode. It's been just a blast. As we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to hit or touch before we close up this episode?
So I'm going to go ahead and plug our podcast, All Clear Firefighter Wellness. We talk about all kinds of stuff from mental health to physical health, how to be a better firefighter, understanding ERCS and BDA. What does that mean? How does that play in? That's the kind of stuff we talk about. So, I appreciate you guys letting us kind of spread this one out and put it on both of our platforms. But if they want to learn anything else about what we do outside of talking about BDAs, allclearpodcast.com. And like I said, we're going to have contacts for, DAS Talk and Dash University. All that'll be in our show notes too. But, typically when I sign off, I always say, light your fire within. But since you guys are taking the lead, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you wrap it up however you see fit.
Light your fire within.
I like it.
Fast Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.